Hey guys, welcome back. Today I've got a collection of some pretty amazing confession stories for you to listen to. So get comfortable and settle in. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's jump right into the first one. My roommate was secretly recording our conversations. I've been living with my roommate Evan for just over a year now, and until recently, I would have described him as the most unremarkable person I've ever shared a space with. He was quiet, polite, and kept mostly to himself. He worked in IT for a mid-sized company and spent most of his free time on his computer, usually with noise-cancelling headphones on. We weren't close friends, but we got along well enough. Rent was always paid on time. The apartment stayed clean. We exchanged small talk in the kitchen and occasionally watched a show together on the couch. It was one of those roommate situations that felt easy and uneventful. That's why what I discovered last month has been so hard to wrap my head around. I work a standard 9 to 5 and usually get home around 6. Evan works from home, so he's almost always there when I walk in. Our routine was predictable. I'd drop my bag by the door, grab a drink from the fridge, and we'd exchange a few casual comments about our day. Sometimes we'd complain about work, sometimes about traffic, sometimes about whatever random thing was trending online. It was the kind of harmless conversation you have without thinking twice about it. A few weeks ago, I started working from home myself for a short-term project. It meant I was around the apartment much more than usual, overlapping with Evan's schedule for the first time. That's when I started noticing things that didn't quite sit right. Evan always had his phone nearby, not just nearby, but placed carefully. On the coffee table, on the kitchen counter, propped up against a mug while we talked. At first, I assumed he was just glued to his phone like everyone else. But then I realised something strange. The screen was always facing us. One afternoon, we were sitting on the couch talking about a nightmare I'd had the night before. I glanced down and noticed his phone resting between us, screen lit up. I thought maybe he was checking a message, but the screen didn't change. It stayed on, dark but active, like an app was running. Later that evening, I went to make dinner and saw his phone again, sitting on the counter, pointed directly at me while I chopped vegetables. When I asked him if he wanted some of the pasta I was making, he responded without even looking up from his laptop, but his phone was angled perfectly toward the kitchen. It made me uneasy, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Evan was a tech guy. Maybe he was running some automation app or testing something for work. Still, once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. His phone was always present when we spoke. If we were in the living room, it was on the coffee table. If we were in the kitchen, it was on the counter. If we were at the dining table, it was resting against a water bottle pointed in my direction. The placement was too deliberate to be accidental. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, Evan left the apartment to pick up groceries. I stayed behind, finishing up a work call. When I went into the kitchen for a snack, I saw his laptop still open on the dining table. The screen was on, showing a folder window. I wasn't trying to snoop. I fully intended to just close the lid so his computer wouldn't fall asleep and interrupt whatever he was working on. But before I could, I saw the folder name. It was my name, not a project name, not a work folder, just my first name, sitting there in a long list of neatly labelled directories. Curiosity hit me like a jolt of electricity. I told myself I shouldn't look. I told myself it was probably something innocent. Maybe a shared document or a note I'd asked him to help me with months ago, but my gut told me otherwise. I clicked the folder. Inside were dozens of audio files. Each one was labelled with a date and time. My stomach dropped. The earliest recording was from 8 months ago. The newest was from 2 days earlier. I clicked one at random and pressed play. It was my voice. I heard myself talking about a stressful meeting at work. I heard Evan responding in the background. I remembered the conversation clearly. We'd been standing in the kitchen while I made coffee, except now I was hearing it played back through his speakers. My heart started pounding. I clicked another file, then another. Every single one was a conversation we had in the apartment. Some were short, some were long, some were deeply personal. There was a subfolder labelled Behaviour Notes. Inside it were documents, pages and pages of typed observations. He had written about my sleep schedule, what time I usually came home, how often I cooked, what days I ordered takeout, what mood I seemed to be in after work, how often I called my parents, which friends I talked about the most. There were notes about my stress levels, notes about my dating life, notes about my habits, notes about my routines. He had been studying me. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. I kept scrolling, hoping to find some explanation. A research project, a study, anything that made this make sense. Instead, I found another folder. Analysis. This one was even worse. He had written psychological profiles. He speculated about my insecurities, my fears, my motivations. He wrote about how I reacted to conflict, how I responded to criticism, what he thought triggered my anxiety, what he believed made me feel validated. It was like reading a stranger's interpretation of my inner life. And somehow, he wasn't entirely wrong. That was the most disturbing part. I closed the laptop just as I heard the front door unlock. Evan came in carrying grocery bags, completely unaware that his entire secret world had just collapsed in front of me. He smiled and asked if I wanted any of the snacks he bought. I don't remember what I said. I think I told him I wasn't feeling well and went to my room. I spent the rest of the evening sitting on my bed, replaying everything in my head. Every conversation, every laugh, every moment I'd vented about my job or my family. Every time I'd trusted him. All of it had been recorded. All of it had been catalogued. I barely slept that night. The next morning I confronted him. I told him I'd seen the files. At first he tried to deny it. He said I must have misunderstood, that I'd probably opened the wrong folder. But when I told him specific file names and repeated things he'd written about me, his face drained of colour. He sat down and put his head in his hands. Then he admitted everything. He said it started as a personal project. He'd always been interested in behavioural psychology and social dynamics. During the pandemic, he'd become isolated and obsessed with understanding human behaviour in a controlled environment. When I moved in, he saw it as an opportunity. He told himself it was harmless because I was his roommate and we talked anyway. He convinced himself that recording conversations in his own home wasn't a big deal. He said he never shared the files with anyone and never planned to. He said he was fascinated by patterns. He said he wanted to understand people better. He said he didn't think it would matter. I asked him how he'd feel if I'd done the same thing to him. He didn't answer. I packed a bag that afternoon and went to stay with a friend. Our lease doesn't end for another 4 months, but I'm already looking for a way out. I can't sleep in that apartment anymore. Every time my phone lights up, I wonder if it's being recorded. Every time I talk, I feel like I'm being analysed. Evan texted me once to apologise. He said he never meant to hurt me. He said he didn't realise how invasive it was. But that's the problem. He had 8 months to realise. 8 months of listening to my private thoughts. 8 months of documenting my life. 8 months of watching me trust him. I don't know what scares me more. That he thought this was acceptable, or that he hid it so well. Now I keep wondering how many other people out there are living with someone who's quietly watching, listening, recording, and taking notes. And how many of them will never find out. That confession comes to an end. What makes this so unsettling isn't just the invasion of privacy, but how calmly and methodically it was done. This wasn't a moment of bad judgment or a one-time mistake. It was months of deliberate observation, recording, and psychological profiling of someone who trusted him as a roommate. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who seem the quietest and most harmless are hiding the most disturbing secrets. And once trust is broken at that level, there's no going back. Our next story comes from someone who discovered their closest friend wasn't just living one life online, but dozens. I found out my best friend has been pretending to be multiple people online. I've known my best friend Lily for almost 12 years. We met in middle school, survived high school together, went to different colleges but stayed close, and eventually ended up in the same city after graduation. She's the kind of person who always seemed socially gifted. She could walk into a room of strangers and leave with 3 new friends. She remembered birthdays, checked in when people were struggling, and always knew what to say when someone needed encouragement. I trusted her completely. She was the person I called when my relationships fell apart, when work stressed me out, when I needed advice about life in general. For years, I thought of her as the most emotionally intelligent person I knew. That's why what I discovered last month has completely shaken my understanding of who she really is. It started with something small and strange. I was scrolling through Instagram one night when I saw a comment on one of my posts from an account I didn't recognize. The username was something generic like Soft Sunset 92, and the profile picture was a blurry photo of a woman sitting on a beach. The comment was overly familiar. It said something like, "So proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. You deserve better than what he put you through." The thing is, I hadn't posted anything about my breakup publicly. Only a handful of people even knew about it, and Lily was one of them. At first, I assumed it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone guessed. Maybe Lily had vented to someone who followed me. It felt weird, but not alarming enough to dig into. A few days later, I got a message request from a different account. This one had a different name, different photos, and a totally different aesthetic. The message was long and emotional. The person said they'd been following my posts for a while and felt deeply connected to my story. They said my strength inspired them and that they hoped I was healing after everything I'd been through. Again, it was strangely specific. I didn't reply. I just left it sitting there, unsettled by how personal it felt. Then it happened again. Another account, another long message, another stranger who seemed to know far too much about my life. At this point, I started paying closer attention. I clicked through their profiles. Most of them had only a handful of posts. The photos looked real, but generic. The captions were vague. The followers were mostly other small private accounts. What bothered me most was the writing style. They all sounded the same. Same tone, same phrasing, same emotional language, the same habit of using certain expressions that Lily used all the time. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. A week later, Lily came over to my apartment. We were sitting on my couch, eating takeout, and catching up like we always did. She left her phone on the coffee table while she went to the bathroom, and it lit up with a notification. I normally wouldn't look, I'm not that person, but the name on the screen made my stomach drop. It was Soft Sunset 92. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe Lily followed the account. Maybe it was a group chat, but something inside me knew that wasn't the truth. When she came back, I casually asked, "Hey, do you know someone named Soft Sunset 92? Her face froze, just for a split second, but I saw it. She picked up her phone and laughed nervously. "Oh, that? Yeah, it's just some random account I follow. Why?" I told her I'd gotten a message from them. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "People are weird online," she said. "Probably just someone oversharing." I nodded and changed the subject, but my chest felt tight. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment of hesitation on her face. That night, after she left, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. The messages, the writing style, the timing, the way Lily reacted. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I opened my laptop and searched her username. What I found made my hands shake. There were dozens of accounts connected to her email. Dozens. Different names, different ages, different personalities. Some were men, some were women, some were college students, some were single parents, some were grieving widows, some were motivational wellness influencers, some were struggling artists, and all of them were real in the sense that they posted, commented, messaged people, and interacted daily. I clicked through conversation histories. My heart started racing as I recognized pieces of my own life being discussed from different angles. One account had comforted me during my breakup. Another had congratulated me on my promotion. Another had given me advice about a family argument I'd confided in Lily about. She had been responding to me as multiple people. She had been creating entire emotional support networks around me that were all her, and I wasn't the only one. I found conversations with other people too, dozens of them. Some were deeply personal, people talking about depression, loneliness, trauma, failed marriages, estranged parents. Lily wasn't just pretending to be one person, she was pretending to be many. She had entire storylines for each account. One woman was going through chemotherapy. One man was rebuilding his life after prison. One college student was struggling with anxiety and isolation. She gave them advice. She comforted them. She celebrated their wins. She mourned their losses. She had built entire emotional ecosystems that only existed because she maintained them. I confronted her the next day. I told her I knew about the accounts. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, staring at the floor. After a long silence, she told me everything. It started during the pandemic. She was lonely, bored, isolated. She made one fake account just to talk to people, then another, then another. She said she liked being needed. She liked being important to someone's life. She liked being the person people turned to when they were hurting. She said it made her feel powerful. She also said it made her feel safe. With fake accounts, she could control everything. She could say the right things. She could avoid conflict. She could disappear whenever she wanted. Real relationships were messy, unpredictable, risky. Her online ones were perfectly curated. I asked her if she ever planned to stop. She said she didn't know how. Some of these people had been talking to her for years. They thought she was their closest friend. Some thought she was the only person who truly understood them. And now I was one of them. I asked her how long she'd been doing it to me. She said almost 2 years. 2 years of confiding in what I thought were strangers, who were actually my best friend, wearing different masks. 2 years of thinking I had support from a wider community when it was just one person pulling the strings. I felt violated in a way I didn't have words for. She knew things about me that I'd only told to those accounts. She had watched me pour my heart out to her in different forms. She had comforted me and manipulated me at the same time. She said she never meant to hurt anyone. She said she just wanted to help. She said she didn't think it mattered because the support was real, even if the identities weren't. But it mattered to me. It mattered that my trust had been built on a lie. It mattered that my grief, my fears, my insecurities had been collected and sorted and responded to like a project. It mattered that she had turned intimacy into a performance. I haven't spoken to her since. She keeps texting me, calling me, leaving long messages about how sorry she is, how she needs help, how she's afraid of being alone. Part of me feels sorry for her. I know she's struggling. I know something inside her is broken, but another part of me feels deeply betrayed. I don't know if I can ever look at her again without wondering which version of her I'm talking to. I don't know if I can trust anyone online ever again. And I don't know if walking away from someone I considered my closest friend makes me heartless, or if it's the only way to protect myself from someone who never truly showed me who they were. And that's where this story ends. Discovering that your closest friend has been playing multiple roles in your life is a betrayal that cuts far deeper than a simple lie. It turns trust into something staged and intimacy into a performance. When the person who knows you best is also the one manipulating your emotions, walking away isn't cruel, it's self-preservation. Let's move on to our next story, which comes from someone who realized a single mistake on their computer completely changed the dynamic at home. What started as a normal roommate situation slowly turned uncomfortable after a private folder was accidentally discovered. This is the story of how one awkward secret turned into weeks of tension and strange behaviour. My roommate found my naughty pics and started acting strange. I've been living with my roommate Aaron for about 1.5 years now, and until recently, our setup worked perfectly. We met through a mutual friend, toured the apartment together, and realised pretty quickly that our personalities meshed well. He was quiet, respectful, paid rent on time, and kept mostly to himself. I worked long hours and liked coming home to a calm, predictable space, and Aaron was the same way. We weren't close friends, but we had an easy rhythm. We'd chat in the kitchen, watch the occasional show together, and split groceries without any drama. It was one of the smoothest roommate situations I'd ever had. About 2 months ago, my laptop started acting up. It kept freezing, randomly restarting, and refusing to connect to the printer I needed for work. Aaron is very tech-savvy. He works in IT and has helped me with little things before, like setting up our Wi-Fi and fixing my phone when it stopped syncing. So one night I asked if he could take a look at my laptop. He said sure and told me to leave it on the dining table before I went to bed, and he'd check it out while I was at work the next day. I didn't think twice about it. My laptop has a password, and most of my personal files are in folders I never really open unless I need something specific. The only thing I did was move a few work documents onto the desktop so he could easily see what programs I needed running properly. Then I went to bed and left for work early the next morning. When I got home that evening, Aaron said he fixed the problem. He explained that one of my drivers was outdated and that a background program was crashing my system. He installed updates, cleaned up some junk files, and said everything should run smoother now. I thanked him and offered to buy dinner, but he declined and said it was no big deal. That's when things started to feel strange. Over the next few days, Aaron's behaviour shifted in small but noticeable ways. He became unusually quiet around me. Our casual kitchen conversations disappeared. If I walked into a room, he'd suddenly find a reason to leave. He started wearing headphones almost constantly, even when he wasn't on his computer. And when we did make eye contact, he'd look away quickly, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. At first I assumed I'd done something to upset him without realising it. Maybe I left dishes in the sink too long, or forgot to take out the trash on my turn. I replayed every interaction in my head, trying to figure out what changed, but nothing made sense. We hadn't argued. There hadn't been any awkward conversations. The only unusual thing that had happened was him fixing my laptop. About a week later, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. When I opened my laptop, one of my folders had been moved. It used to be buried inside another directory, but now it was sitting on its own, renamed slightly differently. It was subtle, but I knew my own file system. That folder contained private photos I'd taken for myself and for a long-distance partner I'd been seeing earlier in the year. Nothing explicit in a graphic sense, but definitely personal and not meant for anyone else's eyes. I immediately felt a rush of embarrassment and panic. I checked the folder's last accessed date. It matched the day Aaron had worked on my laptop. My hands were shaking as I sat on my bed staring at the screen. I kept telling myself that maybe he'd opened it by accident while cleaning up files. Maybe he didn't even look inside, but the folder had been renamed. That meant he had definitely seen it. Everything suddenly clicked into place. The weird behaviour, the avoiding eye contact, the constant headphones, the sudden awkwardness in the apartment. I felt violated in a way I hadn't expected. I had trusted him with my laptop, assuming he'd respect my privacy. I never imagined he'd go poking through personal folders that clearly weren't related to system files. For the next few days, I avoided him too. The apartment felt tense and uncomfortable. I stopped cooking when he was home. I waited until he left to do laundry. I found myself listening for his footsteps before leaving my room. But the strange part was how his behaviour escalated. He started going out of his way to be overly polite. If I walked into the kitchen, he'd rush to offer me water or ask if I needed anything. He started complimenting me on small things, like my outfits or my hair. If I mentioned being tired, he'd offer to make me tea. It was a complete shift from our usual neutral roommate dynamic. One night, I caught him staring at me from the couch when I walked out of my room. When I asked if something was wrong, he jumped and said no, just zoned out. That was when I realised I couldn't keep pretending nothing happened. The tension was making my home feel unsafe in a way I couldn't quite explain. Not physically unsafe, but emotionally exposed, like my private world had been cracked open and I couldn't put it back together. A few days later, I finally worked up the courage to say something. We were both in the kitchen making dinner, standing on opposite sides of the counter. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. I asked him if when he fixed my laptop, he had opened any of my personal folders. The colour drained from his face. He froze, spatula in hand, and didn't say anything for several seconds. Then he said he had only been cleaning out large files and duplicates and hadn't meant to invade my privacy. He admitted that he had opened the folder because he didn't recognise the file names and thought it might be something affecting performance. I told him I knew he'd renamed it. That's when he looked down and said he was sorry. He said he hadn't meant to make things weird. He said he was embarrassed and didn't know how to act around me after seeing something so personal. He claimed he hadn't told anyone and that he felt terrible about violating my trust. I told him that regardless of intent, my privacy had been crossed. I said those photos were never meant for anyone else and that I felt exposed in my own home now. I asked why he didn't just close the folder once he realised it was personal. He said curiosity got the better of him and he regretted it immediately. The conversation was awkward and uncomfortable, but at least it was honest. After that, things didn't magically go back to normal. Aaron apologised again the next day and said he understood if I needed space. I told him I appreciated the apology, but trust is not something that just snaps back into place. For the next few weeks, we kept things strictly professional. No small talk, no shared meals, just two people coexisting in the same space. Eventually, the lease renewal notice arrived. I decided not to renew. I told Aaron I'd be moving out when the lease ended and that I needed a fresh start somewhere I could feel fully comfortable again. He understood and didn't argue. We still live together for now, but the apartment feels different, quieter, more distant. What still lingers is the strange feeling of knowing someone saw a version of me that was never meant to be shared. It's not just embarrassment, it's the realization that privacy can disappear in an instant when you trust the wrong person with the wrong access. I've since locked down every device I own with stronger passwords, encrypted folders, and automatic lock timers. I don't leave my laptop unattended anymore, and I think twice before handing over access to anyone, no matter how helpful they seem. Living with someone means sharing a space, but it doesn't mean sharing every part of your life. I learned that lesson the uncomfortable way. That story comes to an end. It's unsettling how one accidental discovery can completely shift the energy inside a home. What started as an awkward mistake quietly turned into a constant feeling of being watched and judged in your own space. Trust between roommates is fragile, and once it's broken, even silence can feel loud. Sometimes the hardest part isn't what was seen, but knowing you can never unsee the way someone looks at you afterward. Our next story comes from someone who agreed to a simple favour for a neighbour and ended up uncovering something far bigger than they ever expected. What started as an ordinary act of kindness slowly unravelled into a discovery about identity, secrets, and a past that had been carefully erased. My neighbour has been living under a fake identity for years. I've lived in my neighbourhood for almost 6 years now. It's one of those quiet suburban areas where nothing really happens and everyone keeps to themselves. People wave when they pull into their driveways. You recognise the same joggers every morning. The same cars leave for work around the same time. It's predictable in a comforting way. My neighbour across the street, who everyone knew as Mark, fit right into that rhythm. He moved in about a year after I did. Mid-40s, quiet, polite, always kept his lawn immaculate. He worked from home, rarely had visitors, and mostly kept to himself. The kind of neighbour you barely notice, but feel comfortable having around. We'd exchange small talk when grabbing mail or taking out the trash. Weather, work, the occasional comment about how fast the year was flying by. He never talked about family. No wife, no kids, no mention of parents. But I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people live private lives. Everything changed because of a package. One afternoon, I came home from work and noticed a delivery sitting on Mark's porch. It had been raining on and off all day, and the box was already soaked on one side. I rang his doorbell, but there was no answer. I figured he might be out running errands, so I grabbed the package and brought it inside my house for safekeeping. Later that evening, I walked it over and knocked on his door. He answered almost immediately. When I handed him the box, he froze for just a second too long. His face went pale, then flushed. He thanked me, but his voice sounded tense, like I'd startled him. As I turned to leave, he hesitated and asked if I could do him another favour. He said he was expecting a few more deliveries that week and might be tied up in meetings. He asked if I could hold on to them for him if they arrived while he was away. It seemed harmless. I agreed. Over the next few days, more packages showed up, and they weren't small. Boxes from medical supply companies, legal document envelopes, certified mail requiring signatures. I started to feel uneasy, but I kept holding on to them like I said I would. On the fourth day, one envelope arrived that I accidentally opened. It was addressed to Mark, but the return address was from a state government agency. I thought it was misdelivered to me since the street number was smudged. When I opened it, I realised it was definitely meant for him. Inside were documents regarding a replacement birth certificate, not a copy, a replacement. It listed his name, date of birth, and social security number. But something about it felt off. The formatting looked older than it should have. The font was wrong. The seal looked slightly faded, like it had been photocopied and printed. I shouldn't have kept reading, I know that. But curiosity got the better of me. Tucked inside was a denial letter stating that the original birth record could not be located and that additional verification would be required. I felt my stomach drop. Why would someone need a replacement birth certificate if the original couldn't be found at all? That night, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I searched his name online. Nothing came up. No social media, no work profile, no public records, no property records under his name. The house across the street was owned by an LLC. That's when I started paying closer attention. I noticed that his trash never had personal mail in it. No junk mail, no bank envelopes, no magazines. Just food packaging and household waste. I noticed he always paid for things in cash when we crossed paths at the grocery store. I noticed his car had temporary plates for over a year. A few days later, another package arrived. This one was from a private investigation firm. That was when I decided I needed to talk to him. I walked across the street and knocked. He answered, looking tired and distracted. I handed him the package and told him I needed to ask him something. He stiffened immediately. I told him about the envelope I'd opened by mistake. I apologised, but said it had raised concerns. I asked him directly if everything was okay. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he sighed and stepped aside, letting me into his house. His place was spotless, almost sterile. No photos, no decorations, no signs of a personal life at all. Just furniture and a laptop on the dining table. He sat down and rubbed his face with both hands. Then he told me the truth. Mark wasn't his real name. He said his real identity was tied to a life he had walked away from almost 15 years ago. A life involving financial fraud, stolen funds, and a business partner who disappeared under suspicious circumstances. He had never been charged, but he had been under investigation for years. When things started closing in, he ran. He used forged documents to build a new identity. He moved across the country. He found work under the table, saved money, and eventually created the life he had now. The packages were part of his attempt to finally make everything legitimate. He had hired attorneys, investigators, and document specialists to help him clean up his identity and start fresh legally. He said he was tired of hiding, tired of looking over his shoulder, tired of living like he didn't exist. He begged me not to tell anyone. He said he had never hurt anyone physically, that he'd just made terrible choices when he was younger and had spent the rest of his life paying for them. I didn't know what to say. I went home that night and barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. Every car driving slowly past my house made my heart race. I kept replaying his words in my head. What if he was lying? What if he was dangerous? What if he was being searched for right now? Over the next few weeks, more strange things happened. Unmarked cars parked down the street for hours at a time. Men in suits knocking on his door when I was working from home. Late night deliveries. Then one morning, his house was empty. The car was gone. The curtains were pulled down. The mailbox was overflowing. A week later, a real estate sign went up. I never saw him again. I contacted the police and told them everything I knew. They took my statement and said they'd look into it. A month later, an officer called me back. They told me the man living across the street had been using the identity of a deceased child from another state. The real Mark had died in a hospital over 40 years ago. The neighbour I knew had been wanted for questioning in a multi-million-dollar financial crime case that had gone cold. They believe he left the country. Now, every time a new neighbour moves in, I catch myself watching them a little too closely. I look at their mail. I notice their routines. I wonder who they really are. Because for years I waved at a man who technically never existed. That story ends there. It's unsettling how easily someone can build an entirely new life right under everyone's noses. The scariest part isn't even the crime itself. It's how ordinary he seemed while living a lie for so long. It makes you realise how little we really know about the people we see every day. A quiet neighbour, a friendly wave, a normal routine, and behind it all, a completely fabricated identity. Sometimes the most disturbing secrets are hiding in the most familiar places. Let's move on to the next story, which comes from someone who uncovered a secret that completely changed how they see their boss. What started as an innocent discovery at work slowly unraveled into something much bigger and far more personal than they ever expected. This is the story of someone who accidentally learned their boss has been living a double life for over a decade. I accidentally discovered my boss has a secret family. I've worked at my company for a little over 4 years now. It's a mid-sized marketing firm with about 60 employees, and for most of that time, my boss, Mark, has been one of the most respected people in the office. He's in his mid-40s, well-dressed, soft-spoken, and always composed. He's the kind of manager who remembers birthdays, sends thank you emails after big projects, and stays late to help junior staff when deadlines pile up. People admire him. Some even call him a mentor. Mark is married and has 2 kids. He keeps a framed photo of his family on his desk. His wife, a blonde woman with a bright smile, and 2 young boys in soccer uniforms. He talks about them often. He complains about early morning practices, jokes about school drop-off traffic, and sometimes leaves early for family dinners. As far as anyone knew, he was the definition of a stable family man. About 3 months ago, our company landed a large client based in another city, about 4 hours away. Mark was assigned as the lead on the account, and I was chosen to assist with research, reports, and travel logistics. It was a big opportunity for me, and I was excited to prove myself. Our first trip out there was supposed to be a quick overnight visit. We'd meet the client, tour their office, and come back the next evening. I handled booking the flights, hotel, and rental car. Mark asked me to put everything under the company account, like usual, and to forward him the confirmation emails. When we arrived, everything went smoothly. The client meeting went well, and afterward, Mark suggested grabbing dinner near the hotel. He seemed in a great mood, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen much at work. Over dinner, he talked about his career path, how he'd worked his way up, and how proud he was of his family. Nothing about the evening felt strange. The first odd moment came later that night. I went down to the hotel lobby to grab a snack, and ran into Mark standing near the entrance, talking on his phone. He didn't see me at first. He was smiling in a way that felt more personal than professional. His voice was softer, warmer. When he noticed me, he quickly ended the call and said it was just his wife checking in on him. I thought nothing of it. The next morning, when we met for breakfast before heading to the client's office, Mark looked tired. He said he hadn't slept well and joked about hotel beds always being uncomfortable. We wrapped up our work and flew home that evening. Over the next few weeks, we made several more trips to the same city. Sometimes it was just Mark, sometimes it was both of us. And that's when I started noticing patterns that didn't quite add up. Mark always insisted on booking his own hotel rooms separately, even when we stayed at the same hotel. He never let me handle his accommodations, which was unusual since I handled logistics for everyone else. He'd also disappear for long stretches in the evenings, saying he was going for a walk or meeting an old college friend. Then one afternoon, while preparing expense reports, I accidentally opened the wrong file on our shared drive. It was a folder labelled with the client's name, so I assumed it was work-related. Instead, it contained scanned receipts, flight itineraries, and hotel bookings that weren't under the company account. At first, I thought it might be Mark's personal travel records, but as I scrolled, I noticed something strange. Many of the flights were to the same city we'd been visiting, but on dates when our company hadn't sent anyone. There were also restaurant receipts, movie tickets, and even paediatrician bills. One receipt caught my eye. It was from a children's clothing store, and the purchase included items for a toddler and a baby. That alone wouldn't have meant much, except the receipt was dated for a week, when Mark had told everyone he was homesick. I tried to shake it off. It wasn't my business. I closed the folder and told myself I'd accidentally opened something private. But the curiosity stayed with me. A week later, during another trip, I saw Mark in the hotel lobby, holding a small stuffed animal. He froze when he saw me and quickly shoved it into his backpack. He laughed it off and said it was a gift for his niece. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pieces in my head kept clicking together. The unexplained trips, the secret hotel bookings, the children's receipts. The next morning, I went down early for coffee and saw Mark across the street from the hotel. He was standing outside a daycare centre, holding the same stuffed animal. A woman stood beside him, and she was holding a baby carrier. A little girl clung to Mark's leg. He kissed the woman on the cheek. I stood there frozen, watching, as they walked inside together. Later that day, I couldn't focus on work. My hands were shaking as I typed. I kept replaying the scene in my head. I knew what I had seen. There was no innocent explanation for that. On the flight home, Mark chatted like nothing was wrong. He talked about his wife's birthday coming up and how he was planning a weekend getaway for their anniversary. I nodded along, my stomach twisting with every word. When we got back to the office, I tried to forget it. I told myself it wasn't my problem, but the folder on the shared drive haunted me. So did the look on that little girl's face when she hugged him. A few days later, I got a message from IT asking me to clean up unused folders on the shared drive. That same folder was still there. This time, I opened it deliberately. Inside were dozens of photos. Mark holding a newborn in a hospital room. Mark sitting at a kitchen table, helping a toddler colour. Mark standing in front of a small house I didn't recognise, smiling beside the same woman I'd seen outside the daycare. There were also legal documents, a lease agreement in his name, a utility bill, a school enrolment form, and then something that made my chest tighten, a birth certificate. Mark's name was listed as the father. The mother was the woman from the daycare. The child was 3 years old. There was another birth certificate, a second child. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling like I was looking at someone else's life, a life that ran parallel to the one we all knew about. I closed the folder and walked outside to get air. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to do. I hadn't been trying to uncover anything. I had stumbled into it. For the next week, I avoided Mark as much as possible. Every time he smiled at me or asked how my day was going, I felt sick. He was living 2 lives, and I was now carrying the weight of knowing it. Then, last Friday, he asked me into his office. He said he wanted to thank me for my work on the account, and that he'd recommended me for a promotion. I sat there listening to him talk about my future at the company, while all I could think about was the children who called him Dad in another city. I wanted to ask him how he could lie so easily. I wanted to ask him how long he'd been doing it. I wanted to know if his wife had any idea, but I said nothing. I nodded, thanked him, and left his office with my head spinning. Now I carry this secret every day. I see him laugh with co-workers. I see him post photos of his family vacation on social media. I hear him talk about his son's soccer games, and I know that somewhere else another woman and 2 other children are waiting for him to come home. I don't know if I should tell anyone. I don't know if it's my place. I don't know if I could live with myself if his wife never finds out. All I know is that I walked into work one day with a normal job and a normal boss, and now I see a man living 2 completely separate lives. And every time he smiles at me, I wonder how many other people are carrying pieces of his secret without even realizing it. That story ends there. Discovering that someone you trust and respect is living a completely separate life is the kind of revelation that stays with you long after the moment passes. It's unsettling to realize how easily a person can maintain 2 realities without anyone noticing. The most disturbing part isn't just the betrayal, but how normal everything still looks on the surface. When someone can lie that smoothly for over a decade, it makes you wonder how well we ever really know the people around us. Our next story comes from someone who thought they knew every inch of their apartment, until a routine maintenance issue revealed a space that was never supposed to be there. What they found inside turned their sense of home into something far more unsettling. I found a hidden room in my apartment. I moved into my apartment a little over a year ago, and for most of that time, I thought I'd found the perfect place. It was an older building downtown that had been renovated into modern units, but it still had charm. Exposed brick walls, tall ceilings, and big windows that let in a lot of natural light. The rent was high, but not unreasonable for the location, and the layout was exactly what I wanted. 1 bedroom, a small office nook, a cozy living room, and a kitchen that opened into the main space. From the very beginning, I felt comfortable there. It felt safe. The building was quiet, mostly young professionals, and a few older tenants who had clearly been there for years. The landlord lived out of state and used a property management company for everything. Maintenance requests were handled online, and most of the time, things were fixed quickly. For the first several months, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I settled into a routine: work during the day, gym in the evenings, weekends spent with friends or relaxing at home. My apartment became my sanctuary. I decorated it, hung artwork, bought plants, and made it feel like mine. The first strange thing happened about 6 months in. I started hearing faint noises at night. At first I brushed it off as building sounds. Old pipes, someone walking around upstairs, maybe an elevator moving. But over time I realised the sounds were always coming from the same place, the wall behind my bedroom closet. It was subtle, a soft tapping sometimes. Other nights, a faint scraping sound, like something being dragged slowly across a hard surface. It never lasted long, maybe a few seconds at a time, and then it would stop. I mentioned it to a neighbour in the hallway one morning while we were waiting for the elevator. She laughed and said the building made all kinds of noises and that I would get used to it. I tried to let it go, but the sounds kept happening. Then one night, I heard what sounded like a muffled thud. It woke me up around 3 in the morning. My heart was racing, and I sat up in bed listening. Everything went quiet again. No voices, no footsteps, just silence. I told myself I was imagining things. A few weeks later, my bedroom closet door started sticking. It had always opened smoothly before, but suddenly it felt like something was pressing against it from the inside. I had to pull harder than usual to get it open. When I finally did, nothing looked different, just my clothes, shoes, and storage boxes. I pushed everything aside and checked the back wall. It looked solid. No visible damage, no cracks, just painted drywall. Still, something felt off. I submitted a maintenance request about the sticking door, assuming the hinges needed adjusting. 2 days later, a maintenance worker named Carl showed up. He was friendly, middle-aged, and clearly familiar with the building. He took one look at the closet and frowned. "This wall is thicker than it should be," he said. I asked what he meant, and he knocked on it with his knuckles. The sound was hollow in one section and solid in another. "That is not normal for an interior wall," he said. I felt a strange chill run through me. Carl said he needed to check the building blueprints. He left and came back about an hour later with a tablet. According to the floor plan, there should not be a wall here, he said. Your apartment is supposed to extend another 6 feet past this point. I stared at him, confused. So where is the rest of it? He shrugged. That is what we're going to find out. They scheduled a follow-up visit with a contractor the next morning. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump. I kept staring at my closet, half expecting the wall to move. The next day, 2 workers arrived with tools. They cleared out my closet and began carefully cutting into the drywall. When the first panel came loose, a rush of stale air poured into the room. It smelled old, like dust and dampness. Behind the wall was a narrow doorway. A hidden doorway. The workers looked at each other, clearly unsettled. They widened the opening enough for a person to fit through. One of them shined a flashlight inside. There was a room back there. Not a crawl space, not a utility area. A real room, about the size of a small bedroom. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. The room had no windows, no visible vents, just concrete walls and a low ceiling. The floor was covered in dust, but there were footprints, recent footprints. There was a single light fixture on the ceiling, but it did not work. The air was heavy and stale. Then I noticed what was inside. There was a small mattress pushed against one wall. No sheets, no blanket. Just a bare, stained mattress. Next to it was a folding chair and a small table. On the table were stacks of notebooks. The workers told me to stay back while they went inside. One of them picked up a notebook and flipped through it. His face went pale. He handed it to me. The notebook was filled with handwriting. Neat, careful writing. Dates going back years. Each page described a person. Names, descriptions, schedules. Some entries matched my own daily routine. There were notes about when I left for work, when I came home, when I turned off my lights, what time I usually went to bed. My stomach dropped. Another notebook contained sketches of the apartment. My apartment. The layout, the furniture placement, even my bedroom. There were photos, printed photos, taken from inside my apartment. Pictures of me sitting on my couch, me cooking in the kitchen, me sleeping in my bed. I had never seen a camera. The workers immediately called their supervisor, who contacted the property management company. The police were called shortly after. While we waited, I kept looking around the hidden room. There were clothes in a plastic bin, mostly dark hoodies and jackets. There was a pair of gloves, a backpack. Inside the backpack were snacks, bottled water, and a portable phone charger. Someone had been living there, watching me. The police arrived and sealed off my apartment. They took the notebooks, photos, and personal items as evidence. I gave a statement while sitting on the curb outside the building. Wrapped in a blanket one of the officers gave me. I was shaking. I could not stop. They told me they believed the room had been built illegally during renovations years earlier and concealed behind drywall. The management company had no record of it. No one had known it existed. They also told me I was not the first tenant. The notebooks included names of at least 3 previous residents. Each one had pages of notes documenting their lives. One of the officers said it looked like someone had been living in the walls for years, moving from tenant to tenant, hiding when apartments turned over. They never found the person responsible. There were no fingerprints, no security footage that clearly showed someone entering or leaving the room. Whoever had been staying there knew how to avoid cameras. The management company offered to move me into another unit and cover the cost. They also offered to let me break my lease with no penalty. I did not hesitate. I packed what I could that same day and stayed with a friend. I still think about that room, about how close someone was to me every night while I slept, about how they watched my life unfold from the shadows. I check my doors and windows obsessively now. I keep my curtains closed. I installed cameras in my new apartment. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I swear I can still hear tapping. And that's where this story ends. Discovering that someone had been secretly living inside the walls of their own apartment is the kind of nightmare scenario most people never even consider. The fact that this person was documenting daily routines, taking photos, and quietly observing from a hidden room makes it even more unsettling. It's a reminder that sometimes the places we feel safest can hide the darkest secrets, and knowing that the person responsible was never found only adds another layer of fear to an already disturbing situation. Our next story comes from someone who noticed a small detail at work that didn't quite add up. What started as a harmless observation slowly turned into a discovery that shook their entire office and exposed a lie that had been going on for years. My co-worker has been faking a disability for years. When I started working at my current job 3 years ago, one of the first people I was introduced to was a woman named Melissa. Everyone knew Melissa. She'd been there for almost a decade and was considered part of the furniture of the office. She had her own modified desk, a reserved parking spot near the entrance, and a long list of accommodations that management bent over backwards to provide. Melissa used a cane and wore a medical brace on her leg. She moved slowly, carefully, and always looked like she was in pain. We were told during onboarding that she had a permanent mobility disability caused by a car accident years earlier. The accident had left her with chronic pain, nerve damage, and limited movement. Because of that, she was allowed to work shorter hours, take extended breaks, and skip physically demanding tasks. Everyone treated her gently. People carried things for her. They brought her coffee. They volunteered to cover shifts if she was having a bad pain day. She was spoken about with sympathy and respect. Management used her as an example of how inclusive and supportive the company was. For a long time, I never questioned it. Melissa was pleasant enough. She was chatty, loved office gossip, and had a habit of oversharing about her medical struggles. She would describe surgeries, medications, physical therapy sessions, and endless doctor visits. It became part of her identity. If anyone complained about work being stressful, Melissa would say at least they could walk without pain. About a year into working there, I started noticing small inconsistencies. It started with her parking. She always insisted she needed the reserved spot because walking long distances caused severe pain. Yet one evening, as I was leaving late, I saw Melissa walking briskly across the parking lot from the farthest row, laughing on her phone and swinging her cane casually like a prop. The moment she noticed me, she slowed down, leaned on it, and started limping again. I brushed it off. Maybe she was having a good day. Then I saw her at the grocery store one weekend. She was pushing a full cart, moving quickly through the aisles, no brace, no cane, no limp. She reached up to grab items from high shelves, squatted to grab things from the bottom, and loaded everything into her car with no visible difficulty. On Monday, she came in wearing her brace and walking slowly again. I told myself it wasn't my business. Disabilities can fluctuate, pain can come and go, but the pattern kept repeating. I ran into her at a concert months later. She was standing the entire time, dancing, jumping, and moving through the crowd without any assistance. When she saw me, she froze. The next week at work, she showed up with a story about how she'd been bedridden all weekend due to a pain flare-up. Things started clicking into place. She never had visible scars from her supposed surgeries. She never used her brace outside of work. She never took pain medication at the office. She never had medical appointments during work hours. Yet she was constantly talking about how much pain she was in. The real turning point came during a company retreat. The retreat was at a resort about 2 hours away. Management arranged special transportation for Melissa so she wouldn't have to walk far. They booked her a room closest to the conference centre. They even scheduled her speaking slot early so she could rest afterward. On the first night, a group of us went out for drinks. We ran into Melissa at the hotel bar. She was wearing heels, no brace, no cane, no limp. She was dancing with strangers and drinking shots. Someone joked that she looked better than she ever did at work. She laughed and said, "Vacation energy does wonders." The next morning, she arrived at the conference leaning heavily on her cane again. At this point, multiple co-workers had started noticing. Whispers spread. People compared stories. Everyone had seen a version of Melissa that contradicted the one we saw at work. Then one of my co-workers, Jenna, told me something that made my stomach drop. Jenna had gone to high school with Melissa. They weren't close, but she remembered her well. Melissa had been a competitive athlete. No accident, no injury, no disability. Jenna even found old yearbook photos of Melissa on sports teams, dated years after the supposed car accident. When Jenna asked her about it casually, Melissa became defensive. She claimed it happened after graduation. But her story didn't line up with timelines Jenna remembered. Jenna started digging. She searched public records. No accident reports, no insurance claims, no disability filings, no lawsuits, no medical settlements, nothing. What Jenna did find was even stranger. Melissa had been fired from her previous job under mysterious circumstances. That company had also provided disability accommodations. Several former co-workers posted anonymously online about an employee who faked a disability for years to avoid work and manipulate management. The description matched Melissa perfectly. We brought our concerns to HR. At first, they dismissed us. They said it was inappropriate to question someone's medical condition. They reminded us of privacy laws and warned us not to spread rumours. But then someone anonymously sent HR a folder. It contained photos, videos, social media posts, public records, and witness statements, footage of Melissa jogging in a marathon, photos of her hiking mountains, videos of her dancing at clubs, all dated during the years she claimed to be severely disabled. HR launched a quiet investigation. Melissa was asked to provide updated medical documentation. She delayed. She said her doctor had retired. Then she said her records were lost. Then she claimed she needed more time. Eventually, she stopped coming in. A week later, HR called an emergency meeting. They announced that Melissa had been terminated for falsifying medical records and committing disability fraud. They revealed that she had submitted forged doctor's notes and manipulated internal systems to create a false medical file. She had been receiving full pay while working reduced hours for years. The company had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars accommodating a disability that never existed. They were pursuing legal action. The office was stunned. People felt betrayed. Some felt foolish for defending her. Others felt angry that she had exploited a system designed to protect people who genuinely need help. A few co-workers admitted they had covered her work countless times, staying late while she left early because she said she was in pain. She had played everyone. The worst part was realizing how much goodwill she had burned. Several employees at the company actually do live with real disabilities. They now worry that future accommodations will be harder to get because of what Melissa did. Her name was wiped from internal records. Her desk was cleared overnight. Her parking spot was reassigned. It was like she had never existed. Sometimes I still see her social media posts. She moved to another city, new job, new identity, no mention of disability anywhere. I wonder how many workplaces she fooled before us, and I wonder how long it will be before she tries it again. That story ends there. It's hard to wrap your head around the level of deception involved when someone builds their entire identity around a lie and maintains it for years. Melissa didn't just take advantage of workplace accommodations, she exploited people's empathy, kindness, and willingness to help. What makes it worse is how her actions risk making life harder for co-workers who genuinely need support. It's a reminder that while most people deserve the benefit of the doubt, sometimes the truth is far more calculated than anyone expects. Let's move on to our next story, which comes from someone who recently discovered that their entire childhood may have been built on a lie. What started as a simple question about their past quickly unraveled into a shocking family secret that changes everything they thought they knew about their own life. I realized my childhood memories were fabricated for most of my life. I thought I had a pretty normal childhood. My parents always told me the same stories about where we lived, why we moved so often, and why we didn't stay in touch with extended family. I never had any reason to question it. The stories were consistent, emotional, and detailed enough that they felt real. They were woven into every holiday conversation, every old photo album, and every remember when moment. According to my parents, we moved out of our hometown when I was 6 because of a house fire. They said a faulty space heater started a fire in our old place while we were out, destroying most of our belongings. They told me we lost almost everything, including family photos, keepsakes, and documents. After that, they said, we relocated across the state to start over somewhere new. The move explained why I didn't remember much about my early childhood and why there were gaps in our family records. They also told me that after the fire, our relationship with most of our relatives fell apart. There were arguments about money, insurance, and blame. My parents said it became too painful to stay in touch, so we quietly drifted away from that side of the family. I accepted all of it as a sad but understandable story. I'm 29 now, and I never once questioned it until a few months ago. It started when my company switched insurance providers. I had to submit proof of residence history for the last 25 years. I expected it to be annoying, but straightforward. I called my parents to confirm the address of our old house before the fire. My mum hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough for me to notice. She told me she couldn't remember the exact street name and suggested I just put the city instead. That seemed strange. They'd told that story my entire life, but now she suddenly couldn't remember where we lived. I decided to do some digging myself. I searched public property records for the house they described. Nothing matched. No record of a fire, no insurance claim, no ownership tied to my parents' names. I searched newspaper archives for any mention of a fire in that neighbourhood around the time they said it happened. There was nothing. At first I assumed I was looking in the wrong place. Maybe I had the wrong street. Maybe the records were incomplete. But the more I searched, the more uneasy I felt. It was like that house never existed. I eventually found our first confirmed address from school enrollment records. It wasn't where my parents said we lived before the fire. It was a small town about 40 miles away from the one they always mentioned. That's when I started realising something wasn't adding up. I pulled my childhood medical records and found appointments listed in that same town, well past the date when the fire supposedly happened. According to my parents, we had already moved by then, but according to every official document I could find, we were still living there. I confronted my parents. At first, they stuck to their story. My dad insisted the records must be wrong. My mum said trauma affects memory, and maybe the dates were off, but I had too much evidence: addresses, school records, paediatrician visits, and utility bills I'd found through a background search service. After hours of back and forth, the truth finally came out. There was no fire. We never lost our house. We didn't move because of an accident. We moved because of a crime. When I was 5 years old, my parents were investigated for financial fraud. My dad had been running a small contracting business, and it turned out he was using client deposits to pay off older debts instead of completing projects. Essentially, it was a slow-moving collapse of a dishonest business model. When the money ran out, dozens of clients were left with half-finished homes and empty bank accounts. One family in particular had invested their entire savings into a renovation that was never completed. They sued, then others followed. The case became criminal when investigators discovered forged documents and falsified invoices. My parents panicked. They sold our house quietly before any formal charges were filed. They drained their accounts, packed up our belongings, and left town before court proceedings began. They moved under my mum's maiden name and changed our last name slightly, dropping a letter so it looked different on paper. They told relatives they were relocating for work. Then they stopped answering calls. Anyone who pushed too hard was cut off. The story of the fire was created to explain everything. The missing photos, the lack of childhood records, the sudden disappearance, the reason no one from their old life ever visited us, the reason I never met my grandparents on my dad's side. It was all a cover. My entire childhood narrative was a carefully constructed lie. Even worse, they had coached me on it from the time I could talk. When teachers asked about my early years, I told the fire story. When friends asked why we didn't have baby pictures, I told the fire story. When relatives from my mum's side wondered why we never visited my dad's family, I told the fire story. I had unknowingly protected them for decades. The part that hurt the most was learning that my grandparents had tried to find us. They suspected something was wrong when my parents vanished without explanation. They hired a private investigator. They searched records. They even tracked us to our new town at one point. But my parents moved again shortly after. My grandparents died thinking their son had abandoned them. I asked my parents why they never told me. My mum said they were afraid I'd tell someone. My dad said they wanted to give me a normal life. They said they convinced themselves the lie was protecting me, but it didn't feel like protection. It felt like manipulation. They had built my identity on a false foundation. Every memory I thought I had of my early life was filtered through their version of events. Even the emotions I associated with those stories were planted. I remembered feeling sad about the fire. I remembered feeling grateful we survived. I remembered believing we were victims. We weren't. We were running. Now I don't know how to feel about my parents. I still love them. They raised me. They supported me. They were good parents in many ways, but they also committed a serious crime and built our entire life on deception. I don't know how many people were hurt financially. I don't know how many families lost their savings. I don't know if justice was ever served. All I know is that my childhood wasn't what I thought it was. Sometimes I catch myself remembering moments from that town and wondering if they even happened the way I remember. I wonder how many other details were rewritten, how much of my past belongs to me and how much was scripted. I've started therapy. I've reached out to one of the families involved through court records. I haven't said who I am yet. I'm still trying to decide what I owe the truth. But I do know this. The most disturbing part isn't that my parents committed a crime. It's that they raised me inside a lie so complete that I never questioned it for nearly 3 decades. And now every childhood memory feels like a story someone else wrote. That story comes to an end. Discovering that your entire childhood was built on a carefully constructed lie is the kind of revelation that shakes your sense of identity to its core. It's not just about uncovering a family secret. It's about realizing that the memories you trusted were shaped to protect someone else's mistakes. When the truth finally surfaces, it forces you to question not only your past, but the people who shaped it. Sometimes the hardest part isn't learning what really happened, but accepting that your life was built on a story that was never yours to tell. Our next story comes from someone who thought they knew everything about the person they were sharing their life with. What started as a small digital curiosity turned into a discovery that completely unraveled their relationship and exposed a secret world hiding in plain sight. This is the story of someone who learned their partner wasn't just keeping secrets. They were living an entirely different life online. I had been with my partner for almost 3 years when I discovered that the person I thought I loved didn't really exist. We met through mutual friends at a small housewarming party. He was charming, quiet, and thoughtful in a way that felt rare. He listened more than he talked. He remembered small details about me. He followed up on things I mentioned weeks later. When I said I wanted to travel more, he sent me links to places he thought I'd love. When I said I was nervous about changing careers, he encouraged me and helped me rewrite my resume. He felt steady, safe, reliable. We moved in together after 1.5 years. We split rent, we shared groceries, we had routines. Sunday mornings were coffee and pancakes. Tuesday nights were takeout and bad reality TV. He worked in marketing for a tech company, mostly remote. I worked in healthcare with long shifts, so our schedules didn't always line up, but we made it work. Or at least I thought we did. The first strange moment happened when I borrowed his tablet. Mine had died, and I needed to check an email from my manager. His tablet was on the kitchen counter, unlocked. We'd used each other's devices plenty of times before. There was nothing secretive about it. When I opened the browser, I noticed several tabs already open. One was a LinkedIn profile. It wasn't his name. Itziar. The profile belonged to someone named Daniel Hart. The photo looked like my partner. Same face, same smile, same haircut. But the name, job, and location were completely different. The profile said Daniel lived in Seattle and worked as a creative director for an advertising agency. We lived in Chicago. My partner worked as a marketing analyst. At first, I assumed it was a fake account for work. Maybe a project, maybe a test profile. Then I saw the messages. The LinkedIn inbox was full of conversations, people congratulating him on promotions, former co-workers reminiscing, recruiters offering jobs, friends checking in. Friends. One message said, "Miss you, man. Still owe you a drink from when you left Portland." Another said, "Hope married life is treating you well. You picked a great one." Married. My stomach dropped. I closed the browser and sat there staring at the screen. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I told myself there had to be an explanation, some elaborate work thing, some weird coincidence, but the feeling in my chest said otherwise. That night, after he fell asleep, I opened his tablet again. I searched the name Daniel Hart. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, a personal website. It was all there. Photos of him at restaurants I'd never been to, in cities he'd never mentioned, with people I'd never met. Holiday photos, beach trips, group dinners, wedding photos, his wedding photos. He was standing in a suit next to a woman I had never seen before, smiling in a way that made my throat tighten. The caption said, "Best day of my life." The date was 2 years ago. We had already been dating for almost a year at that point. I scrolled through more photos. This Daniel persona had a full life. Friends, family, co-workers, a long history of posts going back nearly a decade. Birthday parties, graduation photos, work achievements. I felt like I was looking at a parallel universe where my partner had chosen a completely different life. Except it wasn't a parallel universe. It was real, and he was living in both. Over the next week, I paid closer attention to his habits. He guarded his phone more than I remembered. He took calls outside. He left the room to respond to messages. He had work trips that now felt suspicious. He sometimes said he was visiting family, but never invited me. I checked his calendar when he was in the shower. There were entire weeks blocked off with vague labels like conference or client meetings. I started matching dates. The weekend he said he was visiting his parents was the same weekend Daniel posted photos from a cabin trip with friends in Washington. The work conference lined up perfectly with a wedding Daniel attended in Oregon. I barely slept. I stopped eating. I felt like I was slowly coming apart while pretending everything was normal. I didn't know how to confront him. I didn't know what version of him I would be speaking to. The man who made me pancakes on Sundays, or the man who had a wife and a whole second life. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. One night after dinner, I asked him directly. I told him I had seen the LinkedIn profile. I asked who Daniel Hart was. The colour drained from his face. He didn't deny it. He just sat there staring at the table for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, that Daniel Hart was also him. He told me he started the second identity years ago when he moved for a job and wanted a fresh start. He said it was easier to create a new version of himself online than explain his past. He liked being able to reinvent himself. At first it was just social media. Then it became professional. Then it became personal. Then he met his wife. He told me he never planned for it to go this far. He said he compartmentalized everything. Chicago life and Seattle life. Me and her. Work here and work there. He said he loved us both in different ways. That was the moment I realized I didn't know this man at all. I asked how long he planned to keep lying. He said he didn't know. I asked if his wife knew about me. He said no. I asked if anyone in either life knew the truth. He said no. He had built two separate realities so carefully that neither one suspected the other existed. Different names, different jobs, different friend groups, different families, different addresses. He had even rented a second apartment in Seattle. I asked how he could look me in the eye every day, knowing he was lying about everything. He said he got used to it. He said it felt normal after a while. That terrified me. I told him he needed to leave. He cried, he begged. He promised he would delete everything. He said he would choose me. I told him that choosing me now didn't erase years of deception. He packed a bag and left that night. I blocked him on everything. A week later, I sent an anonymous message to his wife. I didn't include my name. I just sent screenshots and dates and told her the truth. I don't know what happened after that. I moved out of the apartment we shared. I stayed with a friend for a month. I changed my number. I changed my routines. I stopped going to places we used to go together. Sometimes I still catch myself missing him, or at least the version of him I thought I knew. But then I remember that none of it was real. It was a character, a carefully constructed performance. I was in love with a persona, and the real person behind it was someone who could lie effortlessly for years and feel nothing. I don't know how many other lives he's living now, but I know I will never ignore my instincts again. That story comes to an end. Living with someone who has carefully constructed two entirely separate lives is a level of deception that's hard to even comprehend. It's not just about betrayal, it's about realizing that every memory you trusted was built on a lie. The most unsettling part is how normal everything felt while it was happening, which shows just how skilled some people can be at hiding who they really are. When someone can split their life in half without anyone noticing, it leaves you questioning how well we ever truly know the people closest to us. Sometimes walking away isn't just the healthiest option, it's the only safe one. Let's move into the next story, which starts as a simple school reunion and turns into something much darker. One person reconnects with a teacher they once trusted and admired, only to uncover a disturbing secret that completely changes how they remember their childhood. This is the story of how a beloved authority figure was hiding an entire cult in plain sight. My childhood teacher was running a cult. I never thought a school reunion could leave me questioning everything I remembered about my childhood. For most of my life, my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Holloway, had been one of the few adults I genuinely trusted. She was the kind of teacher every kid hopes to get at least once. She was warm, encouraging, endlessly patient, and always seemed to understand when something was wrong before anyone else noticed. When my parents were fighting at home, she let me stay inside during recess to help organise her classroom. When I struggled with reading, she stayed after school to help me, without ever making me feel embarrassed. To me, she wasn't just a teacher, she was a safe person. So when I got an invitation to my elementary school's 20-year reunion, I almost didn't go. I hadn't kept in touch with anyone from that time, and I assumed it would just be awkward small talk and nostalgia. But when I saw Mrs. Holloway's name listed as a special guest, something pulled me in. I wanted to thank her. I wanted her to know how much she had meant to me. The reunion was held in the school gym. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The basketball hoops hung lower, the bleachers felt cramped, and the stage where we once put on plays barely seemed tall enough to stand on. I recognised a few faces, though most of us had changed so much that we needed name tags. Then I saw her. Mrs. Holloway looked older, of course, but she still had the same calm presence, the same gentle smile, the same soft voice. She hugged former students like proud family members and remembered details about people that honestly shocked me. She remembered who had loved dinosaurs, who had been afraid of thunderstorms, who used to cry on the first day of school. When it was my turn, she smiled and said my name without hesitation. I told her I had become a graphic designer. She said she always knew I'd go into something creative. I laughed and told her she'd been right about everything. That was when she mentioned something called the Circle. At first I thought she was talking about an alumni group or some kind of community program. She told me she still worked with former students and families through the Circle, and that many of my old classmates had joined. She said it was a support network for people who felt lost, overwhelmed, or disconnected from modern life. She invited me to come to one of their meetings. I almost said no, but something about her tone made it sound important, like she was offering me something meaningful. I told her I'd think about it. She smiled and wrote an address on the back of her card. That should have been the end of it. But over the next week I kept thinking about her, about how much she had helped me when I was a kid, about how safe I always felt around her. So when the following Saturday rolled around, I drove to the address she gave me. It was a large farmhouse just outside town, surrounded by trees, quiet, isolated. I almost turned around, but I didn't. Inside, about 20 people sat in a circle on folding chairs. Some were my age, some were older. A few looked barely out of high school. Mrs. Holloway stood at the front of the room, dressed in white. She greeted me warmly and introduced me to the group. They all smiled at me like they already knew me. The meeting started with meditation, then came something they called sharing. One by one, people stood up and talked about how lost they had been before finding the circle. They talked about broken families, failed careers, loneliness, anxiety. They talked about how Mrs. Holloway had saved them. Not metaphorically, literally. One woman said she had been on the verge of ending her life before Mrs. Holloway took her in. Another man said he had cut off his entire family because they were negative influences who did not support his growth. Then Mrs. Holloway spoke. She talked about how the world was broken, how society was designed to keep people confused, dependent, and afraid. She said schools, governments, and corporations all work together to suppress real human potential. The circle, she said, existed to help people unlearn the lies they had been taught. It all sounded dramatic, but the way everyone listened to her was unsettling. They watched her like she was the only person in the room who mattered. After the meeting, several people approached me. They asked personal questions. Where I lived, if I was married, if I felt fulfilled in my life, if I trusted my family. One woman told me I had a strong aura. Another said Mrs. Holloway had spoken about me before. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I asked what she meant. She said Mrs. Holloway always talked about her most gifted students, the ones who had the potential to truly wake up. I left shortly after. That night, I barely slept. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. Not obviously dangerous, just off. Too intense, too personal, too controlling. The next day I started Googling the circle. There was no website, no business listing, no non-profit registration, nothing. But when I searched Mrs. Holloway's name, I found something else. A local news article from 8 years earlier. The headline read, "Former teacher investigated in missing teen case." I clicked it. The article said a 17-year-old girl named Hannah Pierce had vanished after dropping out of high school. Her parents believed she had joined a spiritual group led by a former teacher. The group had relocated several times and operated under different names. Authorities questioned Mrs. Holloway, but could not prove any wrongdoing. The girl was never found. My hands were shaking as I kept reading. There were more articles, more missing teens, more families claiming their children had cut contact after joining the circle. More investigations that went nowhere. Then I found a blog. A woman named Rachel wrote about escaping the circle after 6 years. She said members were encouraged to cut off their families, give up their savings, and move into communal housing owned by Mrs. Holloway. She said relationships outside the group were labelled toxic. She said questioning the teachings was treated as betrayal. She said Mrs. Holloway claimed to be chosen. She said people called her the guide. She said leaving was the hardest thing she had ever done. I felt sick. I thought about the kids who stayed inside during recess with me, the ones who struggled at home, the ones who leaned on Mrs. Holloway when no one else noticed they were hurting. I realised something that made my chest tighten. She had always known which kids were vulnerable. The next day, Mrs. Holloway called me. She said she sensed my hesitation. She said growth often triggered fear. She said fear was a sign I was close to awakening. I told her I'd done some research. Her voice changed. She said the articles were lies. She said the families were trying to drag their children back into a broken system. She said the world feared people who thought differently. She asked me if I trusted her. I didn't answer. She sighed and told me that resistance was normal. She said I was welcome back any time. I never went. A week later, I reached out to Rachel, the woman who had escaped. She told me the group had started when Mrs. Holloway was still teaching. She said she would invite students to private mentoring sessions, then weekend retreats, then spiritual workshops. By the time parents noticed something was wrong, their kids were already convinced their families were the problem. She said Mrs. Holloway had been doing this for decades. I still think about her sometimes, about the woman who helped me believe in myself when I was 10, about the way she smiled when she hugged me at the reunion, about how easily I almost walked right back into her world. I don't know how many people are still trapped in the circle, but I know now that the teacher I trusted most in the world was never just a teacher. She was building something much darker the entire time, and that's where this story ends. It's terrifying how someone who once felt like a safe adult figure could be hiding something so manipulative and dangerous beneath the surface. Mrs. Holloway didn't just influence people, she carefully targeted vulnerability and turned trust into control. The scariest part is how easily something like that can hide in plain sight for decades. It's a reminder that not every kind face has good intentions, and not every mentor deserves loyalty. Sometimes the people we admire most are the ones we need to question the hardest. Our next story comes from someone who thought they knew their family's history until a routine financial check exposed a truth no one ever wanted to talk about. What started as a simple audit quickly unraveled decades of lies and revealed that their family's comfortable life was built on something far darker. My parents lied about where our money came from. Growing up, I always thought my family was just quietly successful. We lived in a nice house in a good neighbourhood, took regular vacations and never really worried about money. My parents drove reliable cars, paid for my college without loans, and always told me the same story when I asked how they had built such a comfortable life. They said it came from smart investing, discipline, and my father's long career in finance. He worked for a mid-sized firm that managed private portfolios, and my mother ran a small consulting business from home. They framed themselves as hard-working, careful people who had made good decisions early and benefited from compound interest and steady growth. It all sounded reasonable. I never questioned it. That changed last year when I decided to buy my first home. I was 29, recently married, and finally ready to put down roots. My parents offered to help with the down payment, insisting it was something they had always planned to do for me. I was grateful, but my mortgage broker required documentation for any large financial gift. The bank needed proof of funds, transaction histories, and a letter verifying the source of the money. My parents seemed a little hesitant when I asked for paperwork, but they said it would not be a problem. A few days later, my dad sent me a wire transfer confirmation and a statement from one of their investment accounts. Everything looked normal at first glance, but when my broker reviewed the documents, he flagged something odd. The account balance was much larger than expected based on my father's reported income history. It was not impossible, but it was unusual. He suggested I have an independent financial auditor review the records to avoid any delays or compliance issues. I thought it was overkill, but I agreed. I hired a local auditor who specialised in asset verification and compliance reviews. That decision changed everything. A week later, the auditor called me and asked if we could meet in person. His tone was careful and serious. When I arrived at his office, he laid out a stack of documents on the table and asked me a simple question. Do you know where your parents' money actually came from? I told him what I had always been told: finance career, consulting, smart investments. He nodded slowly and said that based on the records, that story did not match the reality. The bulk of my parents' wealth came from a single transaction that happened almost 25 years ago. A massive lump sum deposit that dwarfed anything they could have realistically earned at the time. The money did not come from an investment firm. It came from a settlement, and not a legal one. The auditor explained that the funds originated from a corporate embezzlement case in the late 1990s. A regional manufacturing company had lost millions when one of their senior executives siphoned money into shell accounts. The executive was caught, prosecuted, and sent to prison, but not all of the stolen money was recovered. A portion of it had been quietly transferred through several intermediary accounts and eventually landed in a private trust under a different name. That name was my mother's maiden name. I sat there in silence while he walked me through the paper trail. It was clean on the surface, but once you knew what to look for, the connections were undeniable. My parents had received millions of dollars from stolen corporate funds. They had never been charged. They had never been investigated, and they had built their entire life on that money. I drove straight to my parents' house. When I arrived, they were sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee like it was any normal day. I placed the audit report in front of them and asked them to explain it. My father went pale. My mother started crying immediately. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then my dad finally said, "You were never supposed to find out this way. They told me everything." When I was 4 years old, my uncle, my mother's brother, had been the executive who ran the embezzlement scheme. He had moved millions of dollars through offshore accounts and shell companies. When the investigation closed in on him, he transferred a large portion of the stolen money to my parents. He told them it was an inheritance. He said it was legally protected. He said no one would ever trace it. At first, my parents refused. They said they did not want stolen money. But then my uncle told them the company was corrupt, that executives were stealing from workers, and that the money would just be seized by the government anyway. He convinced them they were not really hurting anyone, and they took it. A year later, my uncle was arrested. The investigation focused on the accounts directly tied to him. The trust under my mother's name was never discovered. The case closed. The company went bankrupt. Thousands of employees lost their jobs, and my parents walked away with a fortune. They paid off their house. They invested in real estate. They built a portfolio that generated passive income for decades. They sent me to private schools. They paid for my college. They funded my wedding. Every comfortable moment of my life had been built on stolen money. I asked them why they never told me. My mother said they wanted to protect me. My father said they thought the past was buried. They said the money had been sitting untouched for years before they used it, and that by the time they did, the case was closed and no one was looking. They convinced themselves it was safe. They convinced themselves it was justified. They convinced themselves it was no longer stolen once it had passed through enough accounts. I asked if they ever felt guilty. My father said at first yes, but over time it just became normal. They told themselves they were good people, doing good things with the money. They donated, they paid taxes, they supported charities, they helped family members. They said they built a good life. I asked if they ever worried I would find out. My mother said she had nightmares about it. My father said he assumed I never would. I left their house in shock. For weeks I could not sleep. I kept replaying my childhood memories and seeing them differently. Every vacation, every birthday, every moment of comfort, all of it funded by theft. I talked to a lawyer. He told me the statute of limitations had long passed. The original case was closed. My parents were legally untouchable. But morally, it was a different story. I asked my parents what they had planned to do now. They said nothing. They said bringing it up again would only cause harm. They said the company no longer existed and the victims had moved. They said reopening the past would destroy our family. They asked me to let it go, but I could not. I could not unlearn what I knew. I could not accept a future funded by a crime that ruined so many lives. I told them I would not accept their money for my house. They were furious. They said I was being dramatic. They said I was throwing away security for the sake of principle. They said I was judging them for a decision they made decades ago under pressure. My father told me that if I walked away from the money, I was walking away from them. I told him I already felt like I had lost them. We have barely spoken since. I bought my house without their help. It is smaller and further from the city than I planned, but it is mine. I pay my mortgage every month and know exactly where every dollar came from. Sometimes I wonder if I should report what I know. The company may be gone, but some of the victims might still be alive. They might deserve the truth, but I also know it would destroy my parents. I live with that conflict every day. The hardest part is realizing that the people who raised me on lessons of honesty and integrity built their entire life on a lie. I used to be proud of where I came from. Now I am still trying to figure out what it means and whether I can ever truly forgive them for it. That confession comes to an end. Finding out that your entire childhood was funded by stolen money is the kind of truth that permanently changes how you see your family. It's not just about finances, it's about realizing that the people who taught you right from wrong quietly built their life on something illegal. The fact that the crime went unpunished doesn't make it any less real. Sometimes the hardest betrayals are the ones that happened long before you were old enough to understand them. Our next story comes from someone who slowly realized that their bad luck in love might not have been an accident at all. What started as a string of confusing breakups eventually revealed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. And when the truth finally came out, it changed how they saw one of their closest friendships forever. My friend has been sabotaging my relationships. For most of my adult life, I thought I was just unlucky in love. Every relationship I got into seemed to follow the same pattern. Things would start off great. I would meet someone I really liked. We would connect easily. And for a few months, everything would feel promising. Then, out of nowhere, things would fall apart. Sometimes it was a sudden loss of interest. Sometimes it was a misunderstanding that spiraled into a breakup. Sometimes my partner would say they had heard something about me that made them uncomfortable, but they never wanted to explain exactly what it was. After the third relationship ended the same way, I started wondering if maybe I was the problem. I replayed conversations in my head, looked for red flags I might have missed, and questioned whether I was somehow choosing the wrong people. Friends would tell me I just had bad timing or that dating was hard for everyone. I accepted that explanation and kept trying. The one constant through all of this was my best friend, Megan. Megan and I met in college and became close almost instantly. She was funny, outgoing, and fiercely loyal. She was the person I called when I had a bad day and the one who helped me move into every new apartment. She knew everything about my dating life because I told her everything. Every crush, every first date, every argument, every breakup. She was always there to listen, offer advice, and remind me that I deserved better. Looking back now, that closeness is what made everything possible. The first relationship that really hurt was with a guy named Aaron. We dated for about 6 months, and it was the most serious relationship I had ever been in. We talked about moving in together. I had met his parents, he had met mine. Then one night, completely out of the blue, he told me he did not think he could trust me anymore. When I asked why, he said he had heard from someone that I had been talking to my ex behind his back and complaining about him. I told him that was not true. I did not even talk to my ex, but he would not tell me who had said it. He just kept saying he did not want to get into it. 2 days later, he broke up with me. I cried to Megan for hours. She told me Aaron sounded insecure and that I was better off without someone who would believe rumours over me. I believed her. Then there was Tyler. We dated for 4 months. Things were going well until he suddenly started pulling away. When I finally confronted him, he admitted that he had been warned about me. Someone had told him that I was emotionally unstable and had a history of manipulating my partners. Again, he would not say who told him. He just said he did not want drama in his life and ended things. Once again, Megan was the one who helped me pick up the pieces. She said some people just like to stir up trouble and that it was not my fault. After a while, I started noticing a pattern. Every breakup involved some mysterious third party who had told my partner something negative about me. but I brushed it off. I did not want to believe someone in my life would do that on purpose. The turning point came with my relationship with Daniel. Daniel and I met at a work conference. We lived in different cities, but made the long-distance thing work. We talked every day and took turns visiting each other on weekends. After about 5 months, he started acting distant. He stopped calling as often. He seemed distracted when we talked. Eventually, he told me he was not sure about our future. When I asked what had changed, he hesitated and then said someone had reached out to him online. They claimed to know me and said they were concerned about how serious things were getting between us. My stomach dropped. He showed me the messages. They were from a private account with no profile picture and a generic name. The person said they had been close to me in the past and felt Daniel deserved to know the truth. They accused me of cheating in multiple relationships and said I had a pattern of lying and gaslighting my partners. None of it was true. I told Daniel that I had no idea who would say those things and that it sounded like someone was trying to sabotage us. He believed me, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Our relationship became strained, and 2 months later, we broke up. That night, I sat on my couch staring at my phone, feeling numb. I opened my messages with Megan out of habit, ready to vent, but something stopped me. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had never seriously considered. What if Megan was involved? The idea felt ridiculous at first. Megan had been my biggest supporter. She had comforted me after every breakup. But then I started replaying old conversations in my head. I remembered how she would sometimes say things like, "I just worry that no one will ever treat you right," or "You always attract the wrong people." I also remembered that she had met every one of my partners. I introduced her to them early on because she was important to me. I decided to do something I had never done before. I did not tell Megan about the breakup with Daniel right away. Instead, I created a fake social media account and sent a friend request to the private profile that had messaged him. It was accepted within an hour. I started a casual conversation, pretending to be someone who had gone to college with them. After a few messages, I asked how they knew me. The response came quickly. They said they were a close friend who had seen me hurt a lot of people and did not want to see it happen again. Then they made a mistake. They mentioned a very specific detail about one of my past relationships. A detail I had only ever told one person. Megan. My hands were shaking as I scrolled back through old messages between Megan and me. I searched for keywords, names, dates, stories I had shared in confidence. Everything lined up. I confronted her the next day. At first she denied everything. She said I was being paranoid and that I was projecting my heartbreak onto her. But when I showed her screenshots, her face went pale. She finally admitted it. She told me she had been reaching out to my partners for years. Sometimes anonymously, sometimes pretending to be an old friend or co-worker. She said she was just trying to protect me from getting hurt. When I asked how destroying my relationships was protecting me, she started crying. She said she felt like I always changed when I was in a relationship, that I spent less time with her, that she felt replaced. She said she was afraid of losing me. What she did not say, but what was painfully obvious, was that she wanted me single. I felt like the ground had disappeared under my feet. This was the person I trusted more than anyone, the person I turned to when my heart was broken, the person who had been breaking it. I told her I needed space. She begged me not to cut her off. She said she would stop. She said she would make it right, but the damage was done. I blocked her on everything. I told mutual friends the truth. Some of them were shocked. Others said they had always felt something was off about how involved Megan was in my dating life. For the first time in years, I feel like I finally understand why my relationships never stood a chance. It was never bad luck. It was sabotage. And the hardest part is not losing the relationships. It is losing the friend I thought I could trust with my life. This story is especially unsettling because it shows how betrayal can come from the person you trust the most. Megan wasn't just interfering in relationships, she was quietly shaping the narrator's entire romantic life from behind the scenes. It's disturbing how easily manipulation can hide behind concern and loyalty. What makes it worse is that she watched every heartbreak she caused and pretended to be the comfort afterward. This is a reminder that not everyone who supports you is actually on your side. Sometimes the person standing closest to you is the one quietly pulling the strings. Our next story comes from someone who uncovered a lie so big it shattered a lifelong friendship. What started as concern and support slowly turned into suspicion, and then into a truth they never expected to face. This is the story of someone who realized their best friend had been pretending to be terminally ill for years. My best friend has been lying about having cancer. I've known my best friend Lauren since we were 14. We met in freshman year gym class when we were both hiding in the bleachers, pretending to tie our shoes to avoid running laps. From that day on, we were inseparable. We went through high school together, college together, and even moved into the same city after graduation. She was the person I called when something good happened, and the person I cried to when something went wrong. I trusted her more than anyone. About 3 years ago, Lauren sat me down in her apartment and told me she had cancer. She was shaking when she said it. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. She told me it was ovarian cancer and that they'd caught it late. She said her doctor was hopeful, but cautious. I remember feeling like the floor dropped out from under me. I hugged her and told her I'd be there for everything. Appointments, treatments, bad days, all of it. At first, everything seemed real. She talked about chemo. She said she was exhausted all the time. She posted vague updates on social media about fighting battles and staying strong. Our friend group rallied around her. We organised meal trains. We sent flowers. We helped with rent when she said she couldn't work as much. Lauren became the centre of our world. Over time, things slowly started to feel off. She never lost her hair. When I asked about it, she said her chemotype didn't cause hair loss. She never let anyone come to appointments with her. She said hospital policies were strict. She talked about side effects, but never seemed physically sick. She went out drinking. She travelled. She posted beach photos while also posting about how hard treatment was. I brushed those doubts away. Cancer looks different for everyone, I told myself. Who was I to question her experience? Then she started asking for money. At first it was small amounts, co-pays, medications, parking at the hospital. Then it became larger. She said her insurance stopped covering certain treatments. She said she needed experimental therapy. She said her savings were gone. I gave what I could, so did our friends. We even started a fundraiser for her. It raised almost $10,000. That's when my sister started asking questions. She's a nurse. She asked what hospital Lauren went to, what doctor she saw, what stage she was in. I didn't have answers. Lauren was always vague. She never named her oncologist. She never showed paperwork. She never talked about scans or test results. One night, after Lauren cancelled plans again, because she said she was too weak to leave bed, I drove by her apartment to drop off groceries. Her lights were on. Music was playing. I could hear laughter through the window. She was hosting a small get-together. I stood on the sidewalk holding bags of soup and fruit, feeling something cold settle in my chest. A few weeks later, I saw her post a photo of herself at a spa with the caption Chemo Recovery Day. The spa was 2 hours away. I looked it up. It was a luxury resort. That's when I decided to look deeper. I searched her name and Cancer Foundation registrations. Nothing. I checked hospital donation lists she'd claimed to be on. Nothing. I even called the clinic she said she went to and asked if they had a patient by her name. They didn't. The final straw came when she told me her cancer had spread and that she might not have much time left. She cried on the phone and said she was scared. She asked if I could loan her $3,000 for a new treatment her doctor recommended. I told her I needed proof. She went silent. The next day, she texted me a blurry photo of a hospital bracelet with her name spelled wrong. When I asked for her doctor's name, she said I was being insensitive. When I asked for any paperwork, she said I should trust her. So I confronted her. I went to her apartment and laid everything out. The missing records, the lies, the fundraiser money, the fake bracelet. I asked her to tell me the truth. She broke down. Lauren admitted she never had cancer. She said it started as a small lie for attention when she was going through a bad breakup. People were kind to her. They cared. They stayed. She said once she realised how much support she got, she didn't know how to stop. The lie grew bigger and bigger until it became her entire identity. She said she was scared to lose us. I told her she already had. Our friend group cut her off. The fundraiser money was reported. Some people demanded repayment. Lauren moved shortly after. I haven't spoken to her since. Sometimes I still miss the person I thought she was. But then I remember that real friends don't fake terminal illness for sympathy and cash. And I wonder how long she would have kept pretending if no one had finally asked for the truth. That story is honestly hard to listen to. Faking a serious illness doesn't just break trust, it exploits the compassion people offer in their most vulnerable moments. What makes it especially disturbing is how long the lie went on and how deeply it affected everyone involved, emotionally and financially. Sympathy should never be something someone has to defend or verify, and that's exactly why this kind of betrayal cuts so deep. Losing a friend hurts, but sometimes the truth reveals that the person you cared about was never really there to begin with. And that brings us to the end of today's stories. Every one of these confessions shows how complicated people can be, and how sometimes the hardest lessons come from the people closest to us. If you found yourself thinking, reflecting, or even questioning what you would do in these situations, you're not alone. If you enjoyed listening, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more confession stories, thought-provoking moments, and long-form storytelling you can relax or fall asleep to. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.